day is it?
Tuesday?
No, that's not what I mean. Great Scott! Good Shepherd Sunday was back in May. People were looking for another episode and we missed it.
Well, that's...
I need your help.
Oh.
What do you know about sheep?
Nah.
That doesn't matter. You like history, don't you?
Yes.
Perfect. We can work together. It'll go a lot faster. Come on. There's no time to lose.
Drop my coffee. Where are we?
A field, approximately 3,000 years ago.
Field. Great. Why are we in a field?
Because today's hymn is, "The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want."
Explains the sheep. Is that the only reason we're here?
Of course not. We're here because of him.
The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want, is based on the 23rd Psalm, which means we have to start with a boy named David. King David, to be exact. But he's got a ways to go before he becomes king. David got his start as a shepherd, which makes sense with the sheep analogies we find in Psalm 23. Being a virtuoso on the lyre, music had a special place in David's life, which made him uniquely suited to composing the Lord's greatest book of praises. The 23rd Psalm in particular is full of praise for God's goodness, which stands in contrast to a number of other psalms which reference suffering and hardships. David likely wrote Psalm 23 during the rebellion of Absalom, which found David in the wilderness of Judah, longing for his home. Thus we find in Psalm 23 a record of the comforts of the Lord, even in times of adversity.
All right, sure enough. Now, is that the only reason we came here?
Pretty much. On to the next stop.
All right. Big group of people. Refugees by the look of them. What are we looking at here? Black Death? 100 Years' War?
Bloody Mary.
No thanks, it's a little early.
As you might already know, Mary I ruled England from 1553 until her death in 1558. In that short time, she executed over 300 Protestants throughout Great Britain, causing many people from both England and Scotland to pack up their bags and make a hasty retreat to neutral territory, such as
Switzerland. Justin? Oh, there you are. As I was saying, some of these refugees, when they arrived in Geneva, found themselves in the presence of a rather important figure in the early Protestant church.
Wow, not him.
John Calvin.
John Calvin, obviously.
Calvin was a contemporary of Martin Luther and worked to spread Protestantism throughout Europe. He encouraged his congregants to sing the Psalms as their main source of praises. So to make this easier, he employed poets to translate the Psalms into metered French, which he and most of the locals would have spoken.
Now hang on, what do you mean by metered French?
Put a pin in that one, I'll get back to that. The first poet who was hired by Calvin to work on his Psalter was a man by the name of Clément Marot. Marot was a man with a bit of an interesting past, and an even more interesting rap sheet. He was regarded as one of the greatest poets of the French Renaissance, But some of his best-known works were written while he was serving time in prison, under suspicion of being
A Lutheran.
Much of Moreau's time in the years to follow was spent translating the Psalms. His translations were condemned in Paris, causing him to seek sanctuary in Geneva, where his translations were well received by Calvin. As far as we know, Calvin wasn't very fond of Moreau, as the two were polar opposites. Calvin was a self-disciplined and scholarly sort, while Moreau was a worldly man who found life in Geneva incredibly dull. Even so, with Calvin's encouragement, Moreau continued translating the Psalms until his death in 1544. 5 years later, Calvin met another poet named Theodore de Beza. Calvin was impressed with Theodore's own translations of the Psalms, so he commissioned him to pick up where Moreau left off. And by 1562, the French Psalter was complete.
All right, that's great and all, but Mandu mi paist salbs sa puissance halti doesn't sound a whole lot like the Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want, like we know today.
Yeah, it's a little too French for my taste, too. And I think most of these refugees would agree. Hey guys, what do you think of the French? Meanwhile, when that Psalter was just about finished, another Psalter was being prepared, a secondary one, by one of the refugees, a Scotsman by the name of John Knox.
Knox was an Anglican minister, and as such, found himself forced to leave Britain when Bloody Mary rose to power. He found himself in Geneva, and studying alongside John Calvin, he learned about the Reformed Church, eventually leaving the Church of England himself. Knox became the head of a congregation of refugees there in Geneva, and wrote for his church a book of order, known as the Order of Geneva. This book of order featured 37 psalms translated by a number of different poets. Many of these were written in metered English, following the meter of the Ballad of Chevy Chase.
All right, there's that metered thing again. What's the deal with that?
Well, do you remember when you were in grade school?
Not in the least.
Well, maybe you had an English class where your teacher wanted you to write a limerick. You see, a limerick is typically written with the meter of 88668. Which means that the first two lines had 8 syllables in them. The second set of lines, 2 of them, had 6 syllables, and the final line had 8 syllables again.
Okay, I think I get it. Anyway, you were talking about, John Belushi.
Chevy Chase.
Sure.
Well, anyway, the psalms featured in John Knox's Book of Order were written in metered English, following the Ballad of Chevy Chase.
I'm not familiar.
That was a Middle English ballad, typically sung by bards and such. It was written roughly in 8686 meter, meaning that the first line had 8 syllables, the second had 6, the next had 8, and the last had 6. Later, that became known as common meter.
So what tune did they sing these psalms to?
I'm not really sure. It could have been any number of tunes. They didn't call it common meter for nothing.
Can you think of some examples?
I can think of a few.
My shepherd is a living Lord, nothing therefore I need. In pastures fair near pleasant streams, he setteth me to feed. He shall convert and glad my soul, and bring my mind in frame. Yea, though I walk in vale of death, yet will I fear no ill. Thy rod and staff do comfort me, and thou art with me still. And in the presence of my foes my table thou shalt spread. Thou wilt fill full my cup, and thou anointed hast my head. Yippee-I-O.
Well, I still see one problem. Those aren't the words in the hymnal.
Good catch. That's why we're here in Scotland.
After Bloody Mary's death, Knox and the other refugees returned to Britain. Knox himself led the Protestant Reformation in Scotland, and later established the Presbyterian Kirk, or Church of Scotland. Here in Edinburgh, the Psalter would undergo its first of many revisions. Seemingly at this point in time, everyone and anyone was trying their hand at the psalm business.
Nor sitteth in the scorner's chair,
but placeth his delight upon God's law and meditate on his law day and night. Oh,
A general assembly of the Church of Scotland was held to decide what would be done with Knox's Order of Geneva. Many English translations of the Psalms from a variety of poets were chosen by committee and put into the final version of the Psalter. This then became the Scottish Psalter of 1564.
So that should be the end of it, right? Committee figures it out, church puts the seal of approval on it. That's it, right?
You'd think. Let's jump ahead a few years. The thing is whenever you assemble something by committee, it tends to lose its sense of unity. The Psalter of 1564 was just all over the place. It didn't have a common meter like the Order of Geneva. The tunes were strange and most people didn't know them. And many of the Psalms were wordy and they were hard to remember.
So people just didn't use the new version?
Pretty much.
Well, why didn't they just make a version of their own?
There's the problem. Many did, or should I say, he did.
King James?
That's right.
That's some stuff I actually know. You mind if I take a crack at it?
Be my guest.
All right then, King James. Sometimes called King James VI and First, he was the 6th King James of Scotland and the 1st King James of England and Ireland, and as such, he was an advocate for unity between the 3 kingdoms. This is also the same King James for who the King James Version of the Bible is named. And he actually had nothing to do with translating it, but it was so called because it was translated under his authority. What does he have to do with the 23rd Psalm? James was a skilled writer and thought himself to be just as skilled of a poet. He grew dissatisfied with the clunky Scottish Psalter that he had known all his life, and seeing that no one else was publishing a better one, he decided that he was the man for the job. In 1601, he set to work on creating his own translations of the 150 Psalms of David, but before his death, he would only translate about 31. Now, to say that no one else was making a better translation is just plain false. There were a number of poets that were trying their hand at the Psalms, but as soon as King James set his mind on making his own translation, they knew theirs had no chance of being accepted. One such poet, Sir William Alexander of Menstrie, writing to an associate, had this to say about the situation.
Brother, I received your last letter with the psalm you sent, which I think very well done. I had done the same long before it came, but the king prefers his own to all else. Though, perchance, when you see it, you will think it the worst of the 3. No man must meddle with that subject, and therefore I advise you to take no more pains therein.
Sir William was right. King James thought he was hot stuff, but his poetry was just plain bad. Listen to his version of the 1st Psalm. That mortal man most happy is and blessed, who in the wicked's counsels doth not walk, nor sit in sinners' ways doth stay and rest, nor sitteth in seats of scornful men and talk, but contrary fixes his delight in Jehovah's law, and on his law both day and night to think is ne'er slaw.
Yikes. So what happened after he died? Sounds like he was about 120 psalms short.
Well, that's where Sir William Alexander comes in.
The new king, Charles, wanting to honor his dear departed father, tasked Sir William with finishing his father's work on the Psalter, something Sir William was happy to do. He finished the Psalter in 1631, but even then, many of the public weren't happy with it.
These Scots are hard to please, huh?
That's not the half of it. But anyway.
7 years went by, and it was pretty obvious that nobody was using the late King's Psalter. So seizing the opportunity, a Puritan named Francis Rouse published his own version.
Rouse would have been an influential political figure of the time.
He published his Psalter anonymously and gave it to members of Parliament, then attempted to use his political influence to get it on the fast track to a parliamentary sanction.
Now this guy seems kinda like a slimy dude.
Well, he was a politician.
So I imagine the church authorities were a little hesitant to use some psalter written by a random member of Parliament.
Oh, absolutely. In 1643, Parliament convened an Assembly of Divines. The goal of this assembly was to go through the Psalter and make sure that it was acceptable to the churches in all three kingdoms: England, Ireland, and Scotland.
Ah, yes. Getting the original United Kingdom to agree on something. That always went well.
Indeed. The assembly was divided up into 3 different groups. Each group was given 50 psalms to revise, but of course, the hardest group to please was the Scots.
Over the next 2 years, the Psalter was modified by the council to the point that Rouse didn't even want to be associated with it anymore.
Next came a major disagreement between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The House of Lords had found a completely different Psalter that they had found agreeable. But the House of Commons wasn't about to give up on the one that they had been editing for the past 2 years. So they just went ahead and published the thing, declaring that it should be used in all the churches in the kingdoms. Problem being, the English thought the Psalter was too Scottish, and the Church of Scotland refused to use it. Another 4 years of revisions went by, with the council combining the 1564 Psalter with the works of King James, Francis Rouse, and several others, until in 1649 they finally had something they were satisfied with, declaring it to be the only paraphrase of the Psalms of David to be sung in the Kirk of Scotland.
And that's it? Happy ending?
Just about. But there's not a lot of time. I'll explain the rest on the way.
So what changed with the Psalter between then and now?
Not much, really. The Scottish metrical Psalter was still in publication as recently as 2017. The only real thing that changed was that it's now not the only hymnal that's allowed to be used in Great Britain.
And as for why the 23rd Psalm is the only one that found its way from the Scottish Psalter into our hymnal?
Well, riddle me this. What is the most well-known psalm?
Psalm 23.
And what is the second most well-known psalm? There's your answer.
Well, that's anticlimactic. What about tunes?
What? June will be too late. We have to be back by May.
No, tunes!
Oh! I suppose we have enough time for a quick detour, but we're going to have to keep it short.
One of the tunes that many churchgoers would recognize is the tune Crimmin, which was written here in the Scottish village of Crimmin by one Jessie Seymour Irvine. She wrote the tune as an exercise for an organ class that she was attending. Hi, Miss Irvine!
Oh, hi, boys.
Anything particularly interesting about the town of Crimmin?
Well, not a lot, but the clock tower has 61 minutes on it rather than 60.
Oh, neat.
The other tune many people should know, and the tune that our hymnal uses, is Belmont, composed by one William Gardner. Ah, we're going to be late.
Well, hang on just a second. What made this guy interesting?
He hung out with composers who were more famous than him.
Well, where did he live? How did he die?
Who cares?
We're back and with time to spare, just in time to put out a new episode for Good Shepherd Sunday.
Dave? What's the date?
Great Scott!